The doctor looked at me across her desk and asked if I had any family she could contact. I told her my daughter lived 20 minutes away. She nodded, made a note, and said someone should be here when I came out of surgery. My daughter didn't come. She sent a text at 6:47 in the morning, 40 minutes before they wheeled me into the operating room. Dad, so sorry. Colton has his travel soccer tournament this weekend, and we already paid the registration. I'm sure you'll be fine. You're tough. Call me when it's over. I lay there in that pre-op gown, the one that ties in the back, and makes you feel like you're already half gone. And I read that message 3 times. My daughter, my only child, the one I'd put through college, the one I'd helped buy her house, the one I'd been sending $3,000 a month for the past 4 years, couldn't make the 20-minute drive because her stepson had a soccer tournament. I put my phone face down on the bed rail and stared at the ceiling tiles until the anesthesiologist came in. Here's what I should tell you about how I got there. Not the surgery part, the other part. I retired at 63, 31 years working for the County Water Authority. Not glamorous, but steady and honest, and it paid well enough that I'd saved carefully, invested carefully, lived below my means the way my father taught me. My wife, Lorene, passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. We'd been married 34 years, and she was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in a 3-block radius and made people feel like they were the most important person in the room. When she died, I rattled around in our house in Tucson like a marble in a shoebox. My daughter, Paige, and her husband, Derek, moved back from Phoenix about a year after Lorene passed. I was glad for the company. Derek had lost his job in the mortgage industry when the market softened, and Paige was doing part-time bookkeeping for a dental practice. They had Colton, Derek's son from his first marriage, who was 7 at the time, and a good kid if you caught him before Derek got to him. I started helping out. Nothing dramatic at first. Covered their car insurance because Derek's credit had taken a hit and the rates were outrageous. Then I floated them through a tight month, then another. When their lease came up, I co-signed the new one. When Paige said the neighborhood wasn't safe enough for Colton to walk to school, I helped them with a down payment on a house in a better district. $48,000. I remember writing the check at the kitchen table and feeling good about it. Feeling like Lorene would have done the same thing. Then $3,000 a month became the routine. Derek had a new venture, always a new venture. First it was a landscaping business, then a vending route, then some kind of digital marketing thing he'd watched tutorials about. Each one needed seed money and each one quietly dissolved without ever producing a dollar of actual income. Paige had picked up a second bookkeeping client, but the money, she said, just wasn't enough with Colton's activities and the house and everything. I never asked for the money back. I never asked for a repayment schedule. I never asked them to account for where it went. That was my mistake, and I owned it later when I had the space to think clearly, but at the time it felt like love. Then last March, I started having chest pains. Not the dramatic movie kind, just a tightness, like someone had wrapped a bungee cord around my sternum. My cardiologist, a sharp woman named Dr. Okafor, ran a stress test and a CT scan and told me I had 2 coronary arteries with significant blockage. I needed bypass surgery, not optional, not something to monitor. I was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April. I called Paige on a Tuesday evening. I told her everything, what Dr. Okafor had said, the surgery date, what recovery would look like, 6 to 8 weeks. I'd need some help around the house for the first few weeks. Nothing intensive. Just someone to check in, maybe bring groceries, drive me to follow-up appointments. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, this is terrible timing. We already have the beach trip booked for that week. Destin, we've had the Airbnb deposit down since January." I waited. I mean, is this something they can reschedule? Like, is it an emergency? I told her my cardiologist had used the word urgent. Okay, but like, you're not in the hospital right now, right? You're talking to me on the phone. Maybe we can look at getting you someone, like a nurse or whatever, to be there. I said goodnight and hung up. What I felt in that moment wasn't anger, exactly. It was more like a clarity, the way cold water hits you when you've been running in summer heat. I sat in my kitchen in the house Lorene and I had shared for 22 years, and I thought about $48,000 and $3,000 a month for 4 years. $144,000. And the car insurance and the random checks and the time I'd driven 40 minutes to help them move a couch because they couldn't afford movers. I thought about Lorene's voice saying, "You give too much, Walter." Except Walter is in the file, so I caught that. The name was already used. I thought about Lorene's voice saying what she always said when I was being too generous with people who hadn't earned it. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Bart Hutchinson, and he's been doing estate work in Tucson for 30 years. I told him I needed to make some changes before my surgery. Surgery came and went. I had a neighbor, a retired school teacher named Doris, who'd known Lorene since the 80s, who drove me to the hospital at 5 in the morning and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours with a crossword puzzle and a thermos of coffee. She was there when I woke up. She held my hand and said, "You look like you went through something, but you're here." Doris was 74 years old, and she had a hip that gave her trouble, and she drove 20 minutes to be there. Paige texted from Destin while I was in recovery. "Dad, so relieved. Colton caught a wave today. First time surfing, thought you'd want to know. Call when you feel up to it." I didn't call. The first week home, Doris brought food every other day. My neighbor on the other side, a man named Owen, and I noticed Owen is in the file too. I'm staying clear of those. I'm getting ahead of myself with the names. The point is that my actual community showed up. My daughter did not. She finally came by 12 days after I got home. She brought a lasagna from Whole Foods, still in the grocery store bag with the receipt attached. She sat across from me in the living room, and she talked for 45 minutes, mostly about the beach house and Colton surfing and a disagreement she'd had with her bookkeeping client. And she asked me twice how I was feeling in a way that clearly didn't want a detailed answer. When she left, I went to the kitchen and stood at the window for a long time. I'd already spoken to Bart. The will had been revised. The monthly transfers were stopped, effective the first of the month, a week away. I hadn't told Paige yet. I wanted to see if she'd come back, if she'd ask, if she'd notice. She did notice, just not in the way I'd hoped. On the 2nd of the month, she called. "Dad, the deposit didn't go through." I told her I'd stop the automatic transfers. "What? Why? Is something wrong with the account?" "Nothing was wrong with the account," I said. I'd made a decision to stop the transfers indefinitely. The pause on the other end was about 4 seconds long. Then her voice changed into something I'd never heard from her before, a register that belonged to Derek, clipped and cold and businesslike. "What does that mean? Indefinitely?" "It means what it means," I said. "Dad, we have a mortgage. We have Colton school expenses. We can't just—" She stopped, started again. "We planned around that money." "I know," I said. "You can't just stop without any notice. That's not fair." I thought about the text I received at 6:47 in the morning, in a hospital gown, before heart surgery. I didn't say that. I just told her the decision was made and I needed to rest and I'd talk to her soon. She hung up. Derek called 20 minutes later. I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. By that evening, I had 11 missed calls between the two of them. I listened to Derek's voicemails in order. The first 3 were reasonable, almost conciliatory. "Sir, if we could just talk this through, I'm sure we can find a solution." By voicemail 5, he was explaining that my behavior was affecting his family. By voicemail 8, he was saying things I won't repeat because there's a granddaughter, and by that I mean not Colton. I'll get there. But a granddaughter I love and don't want to associate with the things Derek said in those voicemails. I saved all of them to a folder on my computer. 2 weeks later, Bart called me with news I hadn't expected. He said Paige and Derek had consulted an attorney of their own. He'd received a letter, and they were exploring whether they had any legal claim to the monthly payments based on a pattern of financial dependency they intended to argue had become a form of implied agreement. I sat with that for a moment. They were going to sue me. My daughter and her husband were going to sue me for the right to keep receiving money from me. Bart sounded almost amused in the careful way attorneys allow themselves. He said the claim was weak, borderline frivolous, and that any judge who looked at the documentation would see it clearly. He said I should not contact them directly. He said let me handle it. The hearing was a Tuesday. Bart and I drove over together. Paige and Derek were already in the hallway with their attorney when we arrived, a young man with a good suit and an unfortunate case. Paige looked at me and then looked away. Derek stared at the floor. Colton wasn't there, thank God. The judge was a man in his late 50s, named Judge Alvarado, and he had the particular manner of someone who has heard every variation of human foolishness and has stopped being surprised, but not stopped being annoyed. He reviewed the filings. He asked Derek's attorney to summarize the claim. The attorney did his best, which wasn't much. He used phrases like reasonable expectation and established pattern of support and detrimental reliance. Judge Alvarado listened without expression. Then he looked at Paige directly. "Ma'am, your father had open-heart surgery in April. Were you present?" Paige's attorney tried to interject. The judge raised one finger without looking at him. "Ma'am," Paige said she'd had prior commitments. "A vacation? A family trip that had been, yes. And you've received approximately," he checked the document, $144,000 in regular transfers over 4 years, plus a $48,000 gift toward a home purchase. "My father gave those voluntarily," he did. "And now he's choosing not to give them anymore, which is also voluntary." Judge Alvarado set the papers down with the kind of quiet that functions as punctuation. "Counsel, I'm going to save us all some time. There is no implied contract here. There is no legal basis for this claim. The plaintiff's own exhibits confirm that every dollar was given as a gift with no documented expectation of continuity." He looked at Derek's attorney. "I'm dismissing this, and I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendant, $15,000, payable within 45 days. Derek stood up. His attorney grabbed his arm. Judge Alvarado didn't raise his voice. "Sir, sit down or I will hold you in contempt." Derek sat down. Outside in the parking lot, Bart shook my hand. That went about as well as it could. Paige came out of the courthouse with Derek and their attorney, all three of them in a tight cluster. She looked at me once across the parking lot. Not with anger, exactly, but with something worse than anger. The look of someone who has been caught and knows it and is trying to figure out who else to blame. She didn't say anything. They got in Derek's truck and left. On the drive home, Bart told me they'd have to sell assets to cover the $15,000. They'd already defaulted on their HOA fees for 2 months. Their financial situation, from what the court filings had revealed, was considerably more precarious than I understood. They'd been using my $3,000 a month, not as a supplement but as a structural pillar, and now that pillar was gone. I thought about telling him I felt sorry about that, but I found I didn't. What I felt was something older and quieter, something like the feeling when you finally stop lifting something too heavy and your body remembers it knows how to stand on its own. There's someone I should tell you about. Her name is Addie, and she's 8 years old, and she's my granddaughter, not Colton. Addie is Paige's daughter from a brief relationship that ended before she met Derek. Derek has never been warm to Addie. She looks like Paige but thinks like Lorene. She once spent an entire afternoon organizing my tool shed just because she said it made sense to do it that way. She calls me Grandpa Gil. During all of this, the surgery, the stop payments, the lawsuit, the quiet weeks of recovery, Addie was the one who called me on Sundays, not Paige's calls. Addie's own calls, from her tablet, 15 minutes of her telling me about school and asking what I'd eaten and whether I'd been going on my walks like the doctor said. 8 years old. After the court date, Paige went silent for 3 weeks. Then she called on a Sunday evening, and her voice was different from the business register voice she'd used before. Flatter, tired. Derek is looking for work again. The vending route was a loss. We're going to have to sell the house. I said I was sorry to hear that. Are you? I told her yes, genuinely. I'd help buy that house because I wanted her to have stability. The fact that the stability didn't hold wasn't something I was celebrating. She wants to see you, Paige said. Addie. She keeps asking when she can go to Grandpa Gil's house. I told her Addie was welcome anytime she wanted to come. That hadn't changed. Paige was quiet. Then, Dad, I know I let you down in April. I know that's what this is about. I didn't answer right away. I watched a monsoon cloud building in the east the way they do in Tucson in summer, vast and purple and lit from inside. I told myself the surgery wasn't as serious as Dr. Okafor made it sound. I told myself you'd be fine. I told myself Derek's feelings about canceling the trip mattered more than me going. She paused. I was doing that thing where you talk yourself into what's easier and call it reasoning. I'd heard more sincere apologies and less sincere ones. This one landed somewhere in the middle. What I heard mostly was a woman who'd been married to Derek for 6 years and had slowly let someone else's voice replace her own. I told her what I told her, which I'll keep mostly to myself. What I'll say is that I didn't offer money. I didn't offer to fix the house or the debt or the life they'd built on a foundation of checks from my account. I told her I loved her because I did. I told her that love didn't obligate me to fund a life she and Derek had chosen. And I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, a real one, not a financial one, then I was here, and I'd been here the whole time, and she was the one who had driven away from it, she cried. Not the frustrated crying of someone who wants to manipulate you. The other kind. I didn't ask her to stop or tell her it was okay. I just stayed on the line. Derek and Paige listed the house 6 weeks later. It's sold in 18 days, a decent market, and they cleared enough to pay the attorney fees, settle their debts, and put some away. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near Paige's bookkeeping clients. She picked up 2 more clients. Derek took a salaried job, actual W-2 employment, doing operations management for a small distribution company. He'd hated the idea of it for years. Apparently necessity is an effective argument. I heard all of this through Addie, mostly. She told me about the apartment, about her new room, about how her mom seemed less stressed now, and her stepfather was home for dinner, more often because the job had real hours. Grandpa Gil, she said one Sunday. Mom cried when they moved the boxes in, but she said it wasn't sad crying. I asked what kind of crying it was. Addie thought about it. She said like when something is over but maybe something better is coming. Said that sounded right. Bart called the following Monday to confirm everything was settled. The fees had been paid. There was no outstanding legal business. You handled that with more grace than most people would have, he said. I told him I was 67 years old and grace was cheaper than bitterness at this point. He laughed, which surprised me. Bart is not a man who laughs often. The revised will stands as it is. Addie's education is secured through a trust that neither Paige nor Derek can access. There's a provision for Paige, but it's structured differently than before, not as an ongoing allowance, but as a specific allocation available in the event of genuine hardship, with oversight. Bart's idea, and a good one. It's love with a spine in it, which I should have done years earlier. Paige came by last month with Addie. She brought food she'd actually cooked. Chili, which is what Lorene always made when someone needed looking after. I don't know whether that was intentional, or whether it just surfaced from somewhere old and true in her. We sat at the kitchen table, and Addie showed me her latest reading level certificate, which apparently represents a big deal in 3rd grade. And Paige told me about a new client, a restaurant group that needed someone to overhaul their bookkeeping, and she was nervous about the scope of it. I told her she could handle it. I've known her since she was 3 hours old. I know what she's capable of when she stops letting someone else define the ceiling. We didn't talk about the surgery. We didn't talk about the missed calls or the court date or the voicemails I have filed away on my computer. Some things don't need to be said again once they've been understood. Before they left, Addie hugged me for a long time. The way kids hug when they mean it and don't know they're doing anything significant. Standing in my driveway watching them drive away, Doris waved from her porch across the street. I waved back. She'd already heard most of it, in the way that good neighbors hear things. Not because you tell them everything, but because they're paying attention. I went back inside and made coffee, and sat in the chair by the window that looks out toward the Catalina Mountains. The afternoon light was hitting the rocks the way it does in October, golden and final feeling, which sounds melancholy but isn't. October light in Tucson has always felt like honesty to me, like the landscape is just showing you what it actually is. Lorene used to say that we couldn't make people love us correctly. We could only decide what we were willing to accept and what we weren't, and then live honestly by that decision. I'd spent 4 years and close to $200,000 confusing generosity with love, confusing being needed with being valued, confusing silence with acceptance. I wasn't bitter about it. Bitterness is another way of giving people power over you, and I'd already let that happen long enough. What I was, sitting there with my coffee and my healed heart and my granddaughter's crayon drawing of the two of us stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet that said Tucson. Where the sun does what it wants, what I was fine. More than fine. I was a man who'd learned, later than he should have, that love given without limits isn't love. It's just money. And money was never the thing I had the most of to give.